Hello everyone, I'm Alexander Young. I'm an infrastructure architect in HMRC's Chief Technology Office. I'm mainly working around what our tooling looks like in the future for DevOps, operational support services, and cloud in general, as nebulous as that term has a tendency to be.
And my name is Nicki Watt, so I work for OpenCredo. We're one of the sponsors here. You can catch us downstairs if you want more information. And we've been working with HMRC to help them on their sort of cloud journey, and I'm going to be talking in the latter part of the talk on some of the sort of tools and technologies that we're using in that space. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Alex to start.
We've also been asked to remind everyone to engage with the conference, as is laid out there. And awkwardly, for corporate presentation reasons, we have a second title slide, but please bear with me. So what I'm intending to go through is a little bit of history of HMRC's infrastructure, where we've been, where we are now, and where we're going in the future, both from a technical point of view and from an organizational point of view. And then I'll start talking about this thing that we call Envoy, which is to be our tool of choice for managing cloud infrastructure into the future. We're an organization with a lot of history, 400 years if you count us through different names, so it's always a bit difficult to know where to start. But the most salient point, for the sake of this conversation, is in 2004, when we signed the Aspire contract, which to all intents and purposes is a single supplier contract for all IT delivery within the department, managed by one prime contractor with some subcontractors involved. In around 2010, our state was that we had several of our own data centers across the country, and then we were using some provided by a third party. Throughout the 2010 to 2013 period, we had a number of programs that were looking at consolidating our data center infrastructure down from a very, very, very large number of physical servers to a smaller number, getting higher utilization out of the stuff that we had. Which enables us by now to decommission the last of our own data centers, which was in Shipley. We're now left with the 3 core data center sites owned by our provider. And during this time, we've also moved towards consuming some cloud resources, both from our main infrastructure provider and from some community providers such as UK Cloud and Data Centered. I think the important thing to notice about HMRC's business processes is that they're inherently peaky. I'm sure there are some people in the room who have the fun of doing IT self-assessment once a year. Obviously, we have an inherent peak there around the 31st of January when everybody realizes, oh, I should probably file my taxes. We also have another peak in July around tax credit renewals. The problem that we have around that is that our infrastructure is really quite inflexible. At the moment, we're still, for a lot of things, locked in with that one main provider. So we're paying for peak load all year round when server utilization can hit for like 6 months of the year around 1 or 2% still. But that's the cost of doing business in the way that we do. Where we want to go, however, is of course using what we call hyperscale clouds. To any normal person, you could consider those public clouds. We accept that on the supplier side, the only way for us to really, really get value for buying infrastructure in a utility type manner is if those providers have scale. The private cloud services we consume from our main provider at the moment obviously don't have scale. They are just some racks in data centers that we pay for space in. The thing we are cautious of, however, is vendor lock-in. As I say, we've had, excuse me, I'm trying to do some maths there, 12 years of working with, for the most part, one infrastructure provider. We don't want to just jump into bed with the next provider on the public cloud scale, whoever that might be. We want to be careful to ensure that we have the ability to move as and when we see fit. We're also a bit concerned about Commercial resilience, we don't think that anyone is really too big to fail, even the behemoths in this space. And of course, the standard concern about geographic resilience. The people at this scale have data centers all over the world, although we can only use the ones in the UK. But the ability to say, I have a site in UK North, UK West, whatever, that's very, very good to us. The three big challenges we have in this space are, as laid out, security, culture, and our concerns about lock-in. Security is, of course, very important to us. We have data on every single UK taxpayer and a number of non-UK entities who pay tax to us. We take it very seriously. If we're going to start putting stuff in public clouds, we want to make sure we're doing it right. We're doing it in a secure way. Culture is also a big concern. For that 12 years we've been in this one supplier contract, we've worked in a very waterfall, very process-driven manner. If we're starting to leverage the power of the cloud in any meaningful way, we need to start being more agile. This is tied in around our organizational transformation stuff around inculcating a DevOps culture as well. We're an organization of 65,000 though, and at some point, all of these people are touched by IT delivery. So it's not just a case of talking to the people who are doing delivery for us. It's policy people, it's operations people. They need to understand how this will work going forward. Lock-in, as I've mentioned previously, is also a big concern of ours. We accept that some lock-in is inevitable, whether it's merely by the tools we choose to manage our infrastructure, as Nicki will talk about later, or whether it's the features of a given provider. There is always going to be something tying us to a place. We just want to be careful. We want to be doing it fully cognizant of the risks that that exposes us to. To facilitate this, our big technical transformation piece around this is changing the way our networks work. I'll take a quick break to say that GymNet isn't an emergent RFC or anything. It's just an unfortunate side effect of being in the same room as our CIO when he's trying to give something a name. The person responsible for the work is Jim. We do have a sense of humor, no matter what people say. So at the moment, our network infrastructure is very simple. It's just those three core data center sites linked by dark fiber. What we want to do is essentially move to a hub and spoke type network where we have our corporate WAN essentially spread over any number of cloud providers and, for at least the time being, our core data center sites as well. It's worth noting, because we don't get much of a chance to brag, we're leading government in this space. Looking at the security of this design, we're ahead of where CESG guidance is, but they're also happy with this, you'll be pleased to know. So we are dotting the I's and crossing the T's when it comes to security. But it's never just technical. As I say, we are moving from this single supplier. We are insourcing a lot of the people who currently work for that supplier. They're coming over to us. We're establishing our own delivery groups, which are centered around service functionality. As an example, our tax and accounting platforms are managed by our core business platforms delivery group. Culture change is a challenge, particularly where we're just taking people from our current supplier. Obviously, they are used to the way they've worked for the last decade or so. But I will sincerely say that a lot of these people have been the most enthusiastic people I've worked with in HMRC. They're excited for change. They're excited about the idea of not being hamstrung by a very heavyweight release process and all the stuff tied around that. They're excited about managing their own services rather than just delivering them and chucking them over the fence to people in test and ops. And having bragged a bit, I think it's also time for a bit of humility. We don't have all the answers. We are learning as we go. And I think it's important that we do maintain that attitude of being a learning organization. So what is Envoy and how does it link to all of this? Envoy as a project was given the mandate of giving us as HMRC a tool that will enable the fast creation of repeatable, secure environments capable of running in different clouds. And giving us the capability to say, well, this is the right cloud for X job. from any number of those factors listed on the slide. And for our purposes, we generally have two large and by no means homogeneous groups of users. We have the view of Envoy for developers. What we want to do here is make provisioning easier, faster, more automated. At the moment, if I wanted a new server in one of our data centers, I'd be looking at a 3-week to 3-month wait. And this includes virtual servers, by the way. I'm sure there are people who know how quickly that can be done. But yeah, it's a very long process, and it's very paper-heavy, very process-driven. It is a process, after all. But we're also looking at empowering our developers to self-serve. As I say, get rid of that entire process around having to go to X number of people to get my approval for getting one virtual server in a rack somewhere in one of our data centers. Just having people get what they need as they need it. We then also have what we'll classify generally as management concerns. I want to be able to know what people are doing. Well, I guess first I want to know who is doing something, then what they are doing, why they are doing it, and what I expect the financial impact of that to be. Again, just as with security, we know we're spending public money, we take that very seriously. We want to know we're not just throwing good money after bad. As well as that, we want the ability to say that for the self-service infrastructure, I know what's being deployed. Sort of assurance that I know the right security controls are being put in these environments. And that's something else we want to deliver through Envoy. To start talking about how we've gone about doing this, I think now's a good time to hand over to Nicki.
Thanks, Alex. Right, so the latter part of this talk, we're going to be talking about this framework called Envoy. So it's going to be broken up into 4 kind of areas. The first thing we're going to do is have a look at sort of the functional overview of Envoy. Then we're going to have a look at how it's currently being used within HMRC. We're going to have a look at some of the sort of principles behind it, and then some of the sort of core technologies which underpin some of what we're doing. So from an overview perspective, as Alex said, Envoy it's a framework which looks to bring together a set of different sort of tools and services which will allow developers within HMRC to request and provision infrastructure in different clouds. It's underpinned and it integrates with a variety of different open source technologies and tools. So we're not looking to sort of reinvent the wheel here. Where there's open source technologies that already do this, we want to leverage that. The way that users will interact with Envoy is either through a sort of self-service portal, or there's also an API that they can use if they want to sort of programmatically control it. So in terms of what a sort of typical flow looks like, I think the first thing that we need to just establish is one of the sort of key tenets within Envoy is this concept of an environment template. So with a single environment template within Envoy is essentially a collection of a lot of infrastructure as code templates, which are used to essentially describe the automated way that you can provision and bootstrap a particular system or environment in a particular infrastructure provider or cloud. This will cover things like what are all the networks that need to be created, what are the virtual machines, how do I put the software onto those machines as part of the initial bootstrapping process. And this is all kind of version controlled, and it has some sort of customization aspects that you can hook into. So that sounds a little bit abstract, so let me give you a few examples. So one of the things that the users can do is they can come to the system and they say, I would like to spin up some environment that's based on a basic sort of template. So this will give them the opportunity to have a more sort of pick and mix style of approach. So they can say, I want 3 CentOS servers with 200 gigs of RAM, or I want 2 Windows boxes with this amount of compute storage, and they kind of pick and mix what they want if they maybe need that environment to do some kind of proof of concept. So that's one kind of template definition they can have. But the more sort of interesting one is where you have a template definition that is for a specific team, for a specifically laid out kind of system. So if we take an example where maybe we have a team who's responsible for the development and maintenance of a tax calculator which needs to be displayed to the users. And let's say for argument's sake that this particular system comprised of a LAMP stack. So Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. Within the environment template definition within Envoy, you would essentially describe all of the network layout that your environment needs to have in order to create that. You'd also, for example, you'd say maybe I have 2 Apache boxes and I have 1 sort of MySQL box. You'd also say what is the bootstrapping software that when this environment comes up, I need to load onto that system. So maybe you're going to install Apache as the system boots up. And one of the other things that it has is it specifies what are the target clouds that this type of environment can get spun up in. So you may say in a test environment, you can go to cloud A and B. However, if there's certain other sort of conditions, depending what people put in, you need to get spun up in some other kind of cloud provider. So the way this will work is that teams will come along and they'll say, I would like to request, let's say, one of these tax calculator environments. They'll fill in a few details. They'll say, this is a test environment. I would like 2 Apache servers instead of 1. And by the way, this is the SSH key that I want to use to be able to log onto the boxes once the systems come up. This will then go through, hopefully, a very lightweight approval process. So the current process or the existing process could take months. In this case, it's literally the click of a button, but it could also be auto-approved. But once that's been done, there's then this definition within the system which will allow the development teams to say, right, I now want to provision, deprovision, change that environment as they see fit as part of their processes. Once the environment is actually being created, so it will essentially, the way it will be created is that it will take all of those infrastructure as code templates. It will take the input that the user provided, and it will create the environments in the particular cloud provider. But then you still need to get access to it. Now, in the current system within Envoy, all of these environments are spun up in completely isolated, self-contained sort of units. And the only way to get in is by VPNing into the box. So the templates themselves are also designed to be able to have a VPN server in it to enable this. So users will then need to go to Envoy and they can click a button, they can say, give me my VPN configuration for this particular cloud so that I can get into it. Then they can basically download that, they connect to the environment, and they do whatever it is that they need to do. When they're finished with this, and this environment, maybe it lives for a month, maybe it lives for a week, maybe it lives for a few hours. Depends on the use case. They may have said, I only need this environment for a few hours to do my performance testing or something like that. But it's pretty much, it underpins one of the sort of key requirements for HMRC is that I only want to be able to pay for the infrastructure that I actually use. So unlike in the past, where you maybe had to request your infrastructure months in advance, and even then when the infrastructure was there, you would pay for it irrespective of whether you were using it or not. Here you only pay for a week or an hour or however long it was that you actually want the infrastructure for. And this is obviously helps HMRC from an agility perspective, but also ultimately saving taxpayers' monies, which is really important. So, as Alex said, there's the other side of the coin. There's the developers, but then we also have some concerns around management and the levels of assurance and governance that these particular environments have when they get spun up. Now, the kind of questions that will probably get asked here is around sort of security and the like. So if we have people who are now defining the actual networks that are being spun up in these different cloud providers and infrastructure providers, how do we know that they're actually secure? How do we know we haven't inadvertently punched a hole through something and allowing things to come in? How can we be sure as well that you can repeatably recreate this environment in the same way? So that if it gets spun up and down sort of multiple times, you're also not introducing something kind of different. And also, can we track what changes are made? So when somebody changes an environment, they change the number of machines or they change the networks around. Again, we want to make sure that whatever security and auditing controls were there before, that we can at least kind of track that and make sure that that's possible. And because all of these templates are defined as infrastructure as code, it provides a way for the people sort of wanting to have insight and transparency in these environments to literally go and say, show me the network definitions as they've laid out. Show me what the security ports and things are that have been opened up. And it's all kind of defined as code. they can be confident that these environments can be recreated the same time, the same way every time they're spun up. And there's also, every time an environment does go through a change, it's version controlled and tracked. So they can get an audit history of exactly how things have changed if they want to have a look at that. So how is Envoy actually being used currently within HMRC? So it's still in a sort of beta phase, and it's being used with a select number of teams to be able to sort of trial this out. So as Alex said, HMRC are also going through the process of a massive sort of transformation, and we're using these teams to try and help drive out how this will ultimately kind of work within the broader sort of context and organizational setup. Currently only being used for dev and test environments at present, but it has made a big difference to some of the teams from a provisioning aspect. So we had one team which came to us, and they essentially had a 3-month project that they needed to do. And they'd gone to the existing supplier and said, we need some infrastructure. And they said, it's going to take 3 months before you can even get it. So I said, can we please join the beta program so that we can get our infrastructure a little bit sooner? So literally having been onboarded, they were then able to use that sort of basic sort of template I spoke about in order to get some servers and play and do the sort of proof of concept that they were interested in doing in under an hour, in fact, in a few minutes. So some of you will ask, why didn't you just look at some of the cloud management platform tools out there? There are a variety of commercial and open source sort of tools out there that do some of this multi-cloud provisioning for you. Or maybe why didn't you look at a PaaS? You know, and you could argue maybe you're kind of building one anyway. And I'd say that there's a few challenges which existed in terms of this particular project. And the first one is that besides the sort of typical providers which you think would interact with, there are also a lot of niche ones. And one of the problems we had is that when we looked at some of the cloud management platform tools, it didn't support all of the cloud providers and infrastructure providers we were looking to integrate with. So this already was a bit of a no-go. We also have a requirement to support a diverse range of environments. So the ultimate goal is, yes, to get to a point where we can have cloud native, auto-scaling, containers, and everything that sort of comes with that. But the reality is really that there is infrastructure out there that's just legacy. And some of it is going to have to stay in the data center where it sort of currently is. But there's also there's a sort of middle ground where there's still benefit in being able to take some applications, do some level of minimal transformation just to get them cloud ready and allow them to be spun up and down in a different cloud provider context so that you can actually save money. And Envoy needs to cover all of these the sort of interim step and to the cloud native setup. So if we went with a PaaS, that puts some kind of restrictions on us sometimes in terms of you have to do it this way and you need to use containers or something like that. More importantly, though, the cloud space and the automation space is evolving so fast. What's available now, it was not available sort of 6 to 9 months ago. And with this desire to mitigate vendor lock-in, both from the cloud provider perspective, but also not locking HMRC into any big contracts to begin with, the choice was made to rather go with looking at some other options in this particular space. So the way that we essentially went about going with this was to say, instead of choosing one of these sort of one-size-fits-all type solutions, let's see if we can rather bring together a set of tools and services that will ultimately allow us to achieve the same objective, but in a more lightweight approach. So that sounds fair enough, but you might say you can't arbitrarily throw a whole bunch of tools together and hope that you're going to get a cohesive solution out in the end. You've got to think and plan about how you're going to do this. And this is why there are a set of principles which drove Envoy and the way Envoy was ultimately kind of set up. These principles can be described under what we call an ASAP acronym. So the first one is that we believe you need to automate everything. The goal is flexible, recreatable environments. So if there's any humans in the loop, they basically slow things down, there's manual configuration, and it's just error-prone. The other thing we believe is that you really need to separate your configuration from code. So if you're going to try and recreate environments in different clouds, or if you indeed want to maybe swap some of the tooling out because the cloud market's moving so fast, there's a new tool that's come along, you need to ensure you separate your configuration and code to allow this to happen. You also believe you very much need to adhere to the principle of picking tools in the space that have an API, and also cloud providers. So it sounds obvious, but some people tout themselves as cloud providers, and you have to go to their portal and click things. It just doesn't work if that's the case. But it's very important from a tooling perspective, because if you want to swap tools out, you need to automate that, and an API allows you to do that. Now, this doesn't mean that it's going to be simple, because the APIs are probably fundamentally different, but the fact that there is an API means you have a bit of a chance. And although we certainly don't discount sort of commercial offerings, the preference is really for modular open source tooling. So let's have a look at some of the sort of core technologies that underpin this. So as I've described, there's kind of two elements to what I said. There's a self-service element, and then there's the definition of these environment templates and the way and the technologies around them that are used to essentially spin them up in the different cloud providers. And it's the latter part of this that we're going to look at for the last part of this talk. So as I said before, the sort of key cornerstone are these environment templates. And this is essentially a Git repository which contains all of the code or references to code that we need in order to spin up the infrastructure once we've got the customized inputs from the users. There's three main aspects to this. There's the infrastructure as code templates, so the definition of all the networks, the virtual machines. There's also then the references to the particular base images within the cloud that need to be spun up. So the example here is if you're going to spin a machine up, you want to make sure that, let's say you're spinning up a CentOS machine, that you've got a CentOS machine in cloud provider A and B that's got the same software installed on it, it has all the same security measures, etc. applied to it, so that you can be confident that whichever provider it's ultimately spun up in, you have consistency there. And obviously, we have the bootstrapping scripts that are needed to install any particular software that you may want to install on the boxes once they come up. So the first tool that we use in the infrastructure as code sort of templating space is a tool called Terraform from HashiCorp. And we actually have the CTO of HashiCorp here who's doing the next talk. Not on Terraform, but Terraform is essentially the tool that we use in this space. So this will spin up the networks and the infrastructure in the various different cloud providers. The virtual machines, when they actually kind of come up, as I said before, they're going to have a base image, which is going to need to be consistent within the different cloud providers as a starting point. And for this, we use another HashiCorp tool called Packer, in order to actually build those images and make sure that all of the appropriate security software, auditing, whatever kind of needs to be built into those base images forms part and parcel of each of these. Now, the actual scripts themselves don't form part of Envoy, the template here, but the end result of being able to reference that base image is. And then we essentially allow the teams to be able to offload their sort of bootstrapping process to whatever configuration management tool of choice they choose. So if you want to install your Apache or your MySQL, if you want to do it with Ansible, Puppet, or Chef, don't really mind. You just kind of pick and do whatever one makes best sense for you in your context and for your team, as long as you use something that's automated. So, and finally, throughout all of this process, we have some sensitive data which we need to kind of take care of. So there's cloud provider passwords that we've got to be able to talk to. There's maybe database passwords. And for this, another HashiCorp tool called Vault is what's being used in this particular space. So these are the sort of core open source kind of technologies that are currently being used in terms of doing the provisioning process. And although we don't have time in this particular talk to do a deep dive in all of them, I'm going to just go into a little bit more detail on about two of them to explain why it was a good choice for us in terms of Envoy and how it works. And as I said to you before, the first one is Terraform. So Terraform out of the box supports all of the major cloud providers that you can think of. So your Amazons, Googles, Azure, as well as a variety of other sort of smaller ones that you probably haven't heard of. And although fundamentally all of the cloud provider APIs are different and they're completely different, Terraform allows us to have the same sort of paradigm and approach to spinning infrastructure up. So you have a DSL where you can describe the resources that you want to create in the cloud, and then you use Terraform essentially to create all of your networks and infrastructure. So this means we don't need to resort to doing different things in different clouds. So for argument's sake, if you were in Amazon, you would need to use something like CloudFormation. Or if you were doing something in an OpenStack type setup, you'd need to use Heat. With Terraform, we have one way, one approach in order to spin the infrastructure up, but not tie ourselves to having a lowest common denominator. And it has this pluggable provider API, which comes in exceptionally handy when you come across a particular cloud that isn't supported. So this happened to us earlier on in the project, where we needed to integrate with a VMware vCloud-based provider, and it just wasn't supported, as I said, in any of the sort of cloud management platform tools at that point in time. But with Terraform, we're essentially able to basically write the provider ourselves, and HMRC have actually contributed back into the open source community the VMware vCloud provider. So if you go to Terraform and you make use of it, this was essentially an HMRC contribution. So the thing that made this possible, however, is I'm going to come back to the principles. So one of the principles is we need to choose tools that have got an API. And the fact that Terraform has an API meant that when we came across a cloud, or if we come across infrastructure in the future that's not supported, we can literally write a provider ourselves in order to allow that to sort of move forward. So there's other aspects that are quite appealing to us. Obviously, it deals with different cloud providers, but it can simultaneously deal with different cloud providers. So if you had a system where you said, I would like to spin up half my stuff in Cloud A, half my stuff in Cloud B, and kind of connect them, Terraform provides a mechanism to do that in a single sort of configuration and allow you to do that. And that's something that needs to be catered for in the future as well. It has a thriving open source community, and it very much adheres to our sort of ASAP principles. So the last tool that I just want to briefly kind of talk about is Vault. So Vault, as I said, is a tool from HashiCorp, and it's really used to do the sort of secrets management side of this problem for us. It fits in very well with our ethos because it's essentially a tool whose sole goal is to securely expose and store secrets for you through a very tightly controlled interface. Now, whether you use Vault or whether you choose to use any other tool in this space, the lesson I would really say is important is don't try and roll your own. Security is really hard, and trying to get this right and kind of do your own thing, you inevitably just land up in trouble. So trying to find a product or a tool or framework that will securely be able to do this for you and has gone through the process of making sure that they've looked at all of the security aspects is really key. So besides just being a place where we can store sensitive data, Vault has the ability to have ACL policies. So this means that we can configure it to say, if I have sensitive data for Team A, they can't see those secrets or passwords that Team B needs to use. Likewise, we can configure the tools to say you can only see this aspect of Vault and not another. So from being able to sort of manage the security perspective, that's really important. The other thing is that every time secrets are requested or kind of dealt with, there's an audit log which happens. So in the event of a compromise, you can go through the audit logs and you can see exactly what's happened, who's requested what, and kind of how, and try and use that in order to assess what's gone on. In terms of our setup, we are running a sort of centralized HA Vault kind of setup, and we've basically got all of our tools configured to be able to talk to our Vault provider. The tooling integration efforts vary. So, for example, if you use something like Puppet, there's a Ruby gem already out there which you can literally just plug it in and it will talk to Vault for you. So if your configuration management tool needs to get secrets, you can do that already. Terraform itself, unfortunately, even though it's a HashiCorp product, doesn't actually have native Vault integration yet. I say yet because I believe it is on the way. But again, I come back to this principle. We always choose tools that have got an API. So the fact that it doesn't have native integration, we could still write the wrapper around that ourselves in order to make that happen. And this is one of the sort of, as I said, one of the key principles as to why we kind of choose these tools in the first place. So if we look to bring this all together, we have our users. They come along and they request their environment. I would like my tax calculator system, please. I want 2 Apache servers instead of 1, and here's my SSH key. It gets approved. Envoy would then understand what the sort of target cloud provider is that this infrastructure needs to be spun up in, and it would either obtain and make that password available for that particular environment and store it within Vault, or a reference to it within Vault. Now, there may also be other things. So we had a LAMP stack example. So maybe you've got a MySQL database, which has also got a password. So in that case, it could also generate the password and make sure that that was available for when the teams come along and want to spin the infrastructure up. So the teams will then come along and say, I want to now provision the environments I've just requested. Envoy will say, I know which cloud provider you're going to get spun up in. Let me go and get the credentials out of Vault. And let me hand that off to Terraform to start doing the automated provisioning into the infrastructure provider. Obviously using our sort of base images, which were built by Packer in the first place. As the machines themselves start sort of booting up, we then hand off through something like CloudInit for Linux to whatever the configuration management tool of choice was for the particular team. So in this case, maybe they chose Puppet or Ansible or something, and any potential, so the configuration management tool would then say, let me install the software. So I'm going to install Apache, maybe I'm going to install MySQL. If there are any secrets that were required in order to do that bootstrapping process, it would have been stored and referenced for the environments in Vault. It can then essentially speak to Vault, obtain the secret, and start bootstrapping the system. And the end result is that you land up with a sort of fully configured system that is able to then be used by the team for whatever purposes they want moving forward. So I hope that this gives you a bit of a sort of overview in some of the things that are happening within HMRC and the open source sort of tooling and technologies that have been used in this space. So in terms of a conclusion, this was the mandate that was given for the project. How do we go about creating these fast, repeatable, secure environments which are capable of running in different clouds? And although Envoy still has a fair way to go in terms of a lot of things, and we're still learning as well and working with the business on this, it certainly has ticked, I think, a few boxes. So we now have developers which can create environments in minutes instead of 3 months. This is a massive benefit for the organization. We also have everything defined as infrastructure as code, which means that it's easier to have a look at, from a security perspective and auditability perspective, exactly how things are kind of laid out. So from a management point of view, it helps with the sort of change control process. And we very much believe that in a cloud space where things are changing so much and so often, rather than nailing your colors to the mast sort of quite early, you can look to combine the right tools for the job, and as things change, kind of evolve as that moves forward. And it essentially allows HMRC to be able to choose the right cloud for the job. So if it's better to spin infrastructure up in cloud A compared to cloud B, this tool essentially allows that and kind of breaks that single supplier problem that existed in the beginning. So we're using a lot of open source technologies, but we're also looking to open source some aspects of this, hopefully in due course as well. So hopefully stay tuned for that. So this was made possible because we believe that we really need to stick to our principles. So I'd say in any kind of project that you do, you should really have a set of principles which drive what you do, and then you can be flexible in the tools and the technologies that you ultimately kind of use for that, and that's really worked out for us. And with that, I want to say thank you very much, and I hope that you'll please use the application to rate this talk. And I think we probably have like maybe 1 minute for questions. 2 or 3 minutes, okay. Thank you.
So I have a question through the app. Basically, it's two. What advantages what advantages do small providers give over large providers? Does the lack of support cause more problems than they are worth?
Do you want to take it?
Yeah, so I can take a historical approach to this. 2 or 3 years ago, when we were still first looking at cloud providers for our multi-channel digital text platform, the small players were the only people we could use. So that's obviously an advantage, being able to use them, for mainly reasons around concerns around security. In terms of how that's gone for us in terms of support, it's those providers that we were looking at the vCloud Director contribution to Terraform for. And we have found that there is generally, for the niche providers we've been using, there is something that can interact with them. Perhaps we haven't been as efficient as we could have been with larger providers, but we've gotten the job done. I guess, Nicki, if you have an Envoy angle on that.
Yes, I mean, I think we to a certain extent eat our own dog food. So Envoy itself is itself an environment template spun up by itself, so it's a little bit meta. We had a case where we were on one of the sort of smaller cloud providers and it had a bit of a catastrophic failure and we needed to kind of move somewhere else. So we do tend to see that. So yes, I think there certainly are problems in some problems sort of in that space. However, for various political and commercial reasons, whatever, some of the smaller cloud providers do make sense in certain contexts. But I think the larger ones are better economies of scale, but it really depends on what the particular problem is.
Thank you very much.
Cool. We can catch us hopefully afterwards. Apologies, we've just run out of time. Thank you very much.